Good morning.
Good morning.
Before I was a storyteller, I was a school teacher. They don't teach in teacher college how to work a microphone, so let me get that where I want it to be. There you go. Ooh! How's that? Do you think it's been? Uh-oh. Too loose. Uh-oh. There we go. Now we got it. Good morning. Before I was a storyteller, I was a school teacher at Ferndale Baptist School in North Charleston, South Carolina. Oh, the school closed, so I don't know if that's what you're applauding. Anyway, I taught 5th grade. And I had, at the beginning of the school year, I had 13 students. One of them was a bad egg. So we prayed him right out of there. But you know how bad eggs are. If you've been a school teacher, you know the ones that you pray out go to some other school for about 6 weeks and encourage them to prayer, and then they come back to you. So when he came back, the principal came to me and said, "It's entirely up to you. Do you want to readmit him to your class?" And I said, "Do we need the tuition money?" He said, "Nah, we're pretty flush. I think we're fine." I said, "No, 12 is good enough for Jesus. 12 is good enough for me." So we just let him go to perdition, and I had 12 lovely little disciples. And I really did wake up every morning, and my first conscious thought was about my boys and girls at Ferndale Baptist School. Oh, we're going to read this story today in our reading book, and I know Joseph will love that. And we're going to do this in math, and Christine is so good at math, it'll be her chance to shine. I loved all of my children, but there was one little boy who sat, of course, in the back row who was a little bit of a challenge. His name was Mark. Now, Mark was never disrespectful to his teachers. Oh no, he would never think of doing something like that. He just was goofy. Everything in life was a joke to Mark. He was just giggle, giggle, laugh, laugh, poke, poke, ha, ha, all the time. So he had lots of friends. He was a very merry little boy. You couldn't help but like him. But he never took anything seriously. Never did his homework, failed every spelling test, didn't pay attention in class. I was constantly taking little toys off of his desk that he would drag to school and get in trouble with. He became my challenge. Well, at the beginning of the school year, we were reviewing what everybody had learned in 4th grade, and when we got to English grammar, we were supposed to review the 4 types of sentences in the English language. And I told the kids, I said, okay, now I tell you what, since this is review, I'm not going to make you write a whole page full of sentences, and we won't come up to the board and labor over sentences. Since we just need a quick review, I'll call out a type of sentence, and you raise your hand if you know an example of that type of sentence, and you just give me an example. We'll do this lesson orally. And I said, all right, here we go. A declarative sentence. Remember, that's a sentence that ends with a and a little girl named Christine raised her hand and she said, "We will go to school on Tuesday." I had stolen that idea from the late, great comedian and musician Victor Borga. Do you remember how he used to do oral punctuation? And that's how I would teach punctuation to my 5th graders. When they read a sentence, if it ended in a period, then they had to go, and if it ended in a question mark, they'd go, and if it ended in an exclamation point, bam, like that. Of course, there were quotation marks, and there was comma. So they loved reading from their reading books that way. So it was like, ah, bam, yelled the princess. So I said, all right, very good, Christine. Excellent. A declarative sentence, a statement that ends in a period. Excellent. Who can give me an example of an interrogative sentence? Well, hands go up all over the room except for Mark's. Mark never raised his hand. Well, Mark had not learned the technique that boys and girls must learn. If you don't know the answer, raise your hand immediately. Because the teacher is always going to pass over the eager beavers to help the slower children. So if you don't know the answer, raise your hand and they'll just move right past you to someone else. Mark didn't know how to camouflage himself that way. So he was sitting back there wiggling around and goofing off. Mark was the shape of a bowl full of jelly. Whenever I saw Mark, my first thought was always that line in the Santa Claus poem that says, "He shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly." I mean, his middle name could have been Jello. He just jiggled through life. He was a very merry little boy. And so he was not raising his hand. I said, "Mark, an interrogative sentence? You know, a question." And when Mark would get under pressure, he would slip from English into his home language of Gullah. Now, if you're not from Low Country, South Carolina, you might not be familiar with the Gullah language. The Gullah language is the beautiful Creole language of the island slaves in the coasts of North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. And it's been with us for a long, long time. And lots of boys and girls grow up hearing Gullah words, Gullah phrases. Even if their family doesn't speak all Gullah, they have lots of what you might call Gullah flavor in their speech. And Mark would slip into that when he got into a little bit of a pressure, a little bit of emotional moment. We were a Baptist school, and we enjoyed reading our scripture lessons sometimes from the Gullah translation of the Bible. The Lord's Prayer in Gullah, in the translation that we used, meant, "We pop up there in heaven, all the way be thy holy, precious, righteous name. We want everything up there in the heaven, same like they be down here on the, we want everything down here on the earth, same like they be up there in the heaven. Give we now the daylight bread we need, yah, this day and most every day, and forgive we for all the bad thing we done do, because we don't forgive all them what do by the week. Let us have easy time. Let the living be easy. Don't let us have hard tests when Satan try we. You the Holy King, big boss man over all that we, and everything won't be like you say it won't be. We give you praise forever and ever. Amen." What? Y'all from one of those churches where you clap for everything. So I looked at Mark and I said, "An interrogative sentence." And Mark said, "I know." I said, "No, that's not an interrogative sentence, but I'll let that go. I'll give you another chance. How about an imperative sentence? A sentence that gives a command." And then he said, "I know, bull," which is like oral punctuation in the Gullah language. You add, "I don't know, brother," for emphasis. "I know, bull." I said, "Oh, come on, Mark. Now quit goofing around. I know you can do this. Here, now, this is the fun one. A sentence that ends in a wham! You're going to give me a sentence of strong feeling, an exclamatory sentence." And all of a sudden he said, "I got this, Mr. Lowry, I got this." He jumped up and said, "School sucks!" Bam! We were at Ferndale Baptist School. That is not in the Bible, not even the Gullah translation. I said, "Mark, we're going to have to go talk to the principal about that." So we got up, went down to the principal's office. I said, "Would you tell the principal what you said?" I said, "Don't you dare say, 'I know.'" So he told the principal what he said, and the principal just burst out laughing. And he said, "Mr. Lowry, there's something that you need to know. You're new to our school, but Mark's family has been with us all along. There's Mark. In the grade below him, there's Marquisa. In the grade below him, there's Marcus. And they're all three coming up to you one at a time, so you better learn how to handle this all on your own." And he just patted Mark on the back and said, "Try to be a good boy, Mark," and sent him back to class. What was I supposed to do with that? In Catholic school, I mean, they would tie you up or something. So I said, "Okay, so fine." So the principal had given me a project. I had to find something that would motivate Mark to do something besides goof off all the time. Well, in our reading book, in the non-fiction section, there were all kinds of articles about world history, and we had read an article about Hatshepsut, only female pharaoh of ancient Egypt. The article was all about the pyramids and the camels and all that kind of stuff. We learned that Hatshepsut may have very well been Joseph's mother, not Joseph, Moses' mother from the Old Testament. It was like, wow, that's really cool. Well, the next morning on my way to school, I was driving down the road, and it was garbage day in my neighborhood, so everybody had their garbage bins out on the sidewalk, and I was shooting down the road in my car, and I passed by a garbage bin, and I saw a pair of legs sticking up out of the garbage bin, which didn't surprise me, because this was North Charleston, murder capital of South Carolina, so I didn't even blink an eye. But then I realized, now they'd have done a better job of stashing the body than that. So I backed up, and I saw it was two big Barbie doll legs sticking out the top of the trash can. One of those great big 3-foot Barbie dolls. Some kid had drawn all over it with an ink pen, and the mother had thought ruined and tossed it out in the trash. I grabbed that doll, and I threw it in the back seat of my car, and I drove off to school. And as soon as we'd had roll and the Pledge of Allegiance and prayer and all that, I sat the kids down and I said, "Okay, when we left off with our reading yesterday, remember we read about Hatshepsut, female pharaoh of ancient Egypt?" "Oh yeah, we remember that." I said, "She's in the back of my car. And when you see her, you'll see she died from some horrible skin disease. And I thought it might be fun if this morning we made a mummy of Hatshepsut." "Cool." And I was especially thinking of Mark. What 5th grade boy doesn't like dead people? So we went and got the doll and we stretched her out on my desk and we looked up in the encyclopedia all about how to make a mummy. We got a coat hanger and pretended we were extracting the brain through the nose and fed it to our pretend cat. And then we got canopic jars and we put all the organs in jars. Then we got a big roll of duct tape and we wrapped up the mummy with a roll of duct tape. And then I told the kids, I said, all right, here's what we're going to do. We've got to move on with other things this morning, but tomorrow when you come to school, bring a white bed sheet, because we had seen that in the encyclopedia that Egyptians always wore long white robes for very formal occasions. Bring a white bed sheet from home and we'll wrap up in our bed sheets and we'll have an Egyptian funeral. We will have Hatshepsut borne down the hallway overhead. We'll clang cymbals, we'll all fall prostrate before the pharaoh, and then we'll lay her body in state at the end of the hallway in an empty classroom, and I'll let you have colored chalk and you can draw hieroglyphics all over the chalkboard. Oh, they were so excited they could hardly stand themselves. So they all ran home and brought back white bed sheets except for Mark, and he was wearing Star Wars print. Mark, Darth Vader was not an Egyptian. Giggle, giggle, ha ha, jiggle, jiggle. I didn't know what I was going to do to motivate this boy. And then I found something that turned him on. The next article in this reading book about world history was all about ancient Rome. And we learned all about ancient games, kind of like the Olympics, the Greeks, the Romans, all of that business. And Mark learned that the ancient Romans loved wrestling. Well, they were talking about Greco-Roman wrestling, you know, a legitimate sport. In his mind, that meant one thing, WWF, Worldwide Wrestling Federation. After that, every sample sentence that he wrote, every essay that he composed, everything he talked about was WWF. Pile driving this person, body slamming that person off the top rope. That's what he'd say all the time. If you really like something, he'd say, wow, Mr. Lowry, that is off the top rope. Woo. When he would finish his work, he would go to the art shelf and he would pull out some paper. I always kept art supplies. If you had extra time, you could go make something creative at the art shelf. He would rush through his work, then he'd go to the art shelf and get some paper. He'd take a long strip of cardboard like that, and then get the glue bottle and a piece of gold construction paper and cut himself a big oval of gold and glue it right in the middle of that cardboard strip, and that was his wrestling belt. And he was forever getting in trouble on the playground for pile driving kids in the sandbox with his wrestling belt. He'd say, I am The Rock. That was his favorite wrestler. Do you remember The Rock? He's a movie star now, and he does the corporate eyebrow like that. Mark, no contact sports. You cannot, we're Baptists. We only lay hands on you when we dunk you underwater. Now quit pile driving people in the sandbox. Well, to get a break from the rigors of teaching 5th grade, I volunteered to teach English as a second language at the public library. And I thought when I did that volunteer work on Sunday afternoons, when we first started the class, I just assumed that we would have a number of Hispanics, maybe a few Asians. As it turned out, I had a dozen Russian grandmothers and grandfathers. My youngest English student was 69, my oldest was 85. And at our first class meeting, they said, we have little knowledge of America. Very hard for English for us. You must treat us like children. And so on their cue, I used the very same teaching methods that I used in 5th grade. And it was very much like 5th grade. I had the same petty arguments. I had the same class bullies. I had the same do-nothing that sat on the back row. His name was Avram Mikulinski. He was also shaped like an extra large bowl full of Jell-O and was jiggling his way through this new culture in America. I didn't know what I was going to do with him. Now, his wife was like my little student, Christine. She could have been a good Baptist if she was raised in Russia and didn't know anything about that. She was very motivated, a very good student. We had a lovely curriculum. It was called Word by Word, and it was this big fold-out book with a cartoon picture of everyday life in these United States with some vocabulary words. And after you looked at the picture and practiced the vocabulary words, you would engage your students in conversation and give them a chance to practice conversational English. So one week the theme might be the hospital, and you would have conversations about how to handle emergencies. The next week the conversation might be about a grocery store, and you would play games of pretending you were shopping for groceries and asking where is the milk and things like that. One week, the conversation was foods. And you were supposed to name your favorite food and then tell how to make it. Well, my Russians would go home and prepare their lessons, and they would laboriously write everything out in English because they were afraid they could not say it properly. So I said, Ghana, what is your favorite food? And she picks up her little cue card and she says, Mr. Lowry, my friend, I would like for to explain how to make wonderful American food hamburger. So that's good, but when you speak orally, you don't have to do the but that's just a teaching technique. And she gave us a recipe for how to make hamburger, which was how she was pronouncing hamburger. And then I turned to her husband and I said, Avram, what is your favorite food? And he said, I like ice cream. Now, that was Avram's version of, I know, Bo. You could ask him any question in the English language, and if he didn't know how to respond, he would just simply shrug and say, I like ice cream. So I said, okay, good, you like ice cream. Can you tell us in the English language, how would you make ice cream? He sat there a few minutes with his eyes rolling around, and finally he started to grin. He said, for make ice cream, you take 5, you put 5 in freezer, and you say 5, no come out until ice cream. Ha ha ha. Well, I hit on a brilliant idea. In 5th grade class at Ferndale Baptist School, we had a half hour at the end of the week where we had finished all of our lessons, but it was still a half hour until dismissal time. So every Friday afternoon, I instituted Russian Culture Club. And we bought a book and tape, Teach Yourself Russian in 18 Easy Lessons at Barnes & Noble bookstore, and I did what every poor school teacher does. I photocopied that book 12 times over and handed it out to all of my children, and we would play the Russian language tapes and we would learn Russian vocabulary. And then I had my kids pen pal with one of my Russians, and they would write letters in English to my Russians. It's funny how immediately we started referring to them as our Russians. Do you have Russians? We could trade like baseball cards. I'll give you a Gorbachev and you give me a Zelensky. And so we would write our Russians letters. It was just something to do. I was just filling space, but it was an instant hit. Now they had a real-life reason to get their English grammar absolutely correct because they knew that people who were learning the English language were dependent on them for good examples. And so I'd put kids together and they were editing each other's papers, and you'd hear them say things like, you forgot to capitalize this sentence. It don't matter, you know what I'm saying. It's not for me, it's for the Russians, and they don't know what you're talking about. I paired Mark with Avram. I figured they understood each other very well. And of course, Mark wrote letters about Worldwide Wrestling Federation. And I took a letter to Avram and I said, Avram, do you know what he's saying? He said, I like ice cream. And his wife, Ghana Mikulinski, was a very good English student, one of my prized pupils. And she said, I will read this letter. And she read, today I pile drive James on playground. It was top rope. She said, what is pile drive? I don't understand this. I said, well, he's talking about wrestling and he's speaking in American lingo, wrestling lingo. I said the term for that is idiom. Do you know about idiom? She said, the idiom is very hard. People say rain cat dog. I say no cat fall from sky. What from this? I said, well, you know, Russians have idiom too. It's just expressions that are common in the language. Unless you were born to that language, you probably don't really understand those. So we had this long conversation about American idiom. And I said, and while we're on the subject, because I'm your English teacher, let me do you the favor of also discussing American slang. Because you may come to a situation where someone uses a word or a racial epithet or something that's very offensive, but you being new to our culture, you might not understand what's being said, and I wouldn't want you to embarrass yourself by repeating that or not know how to properly respond. So we made a list of things that they might hear, and as an example, I said, school sucks. And they said, what for this mean, school suck? And I said, that's beyond the scope of this lesson, but just know if somebody says that, they're not paying you a compliment. We moved on. Well, eventually, we got to a point with our Russian Culture Club and my English Language Club that we decided we would have a field trip together with our Russian pen pals. So I put my 12 Ferndale Baptist babies on the bus, and we drove down the road to West, actually, to the Sherman House next door to the Jewish Community Center. That's where all of my Russian grandmas and grandpas live. And we pulled up to the retirement center at the Sherman House, and one of my Russian students, a tall, distinguished man named Michael Kogan, stepped up on the bus, and he looked at my children and he said, "Zdravstvuyte." And all my children said, "Dobry den," hello, and they said, "Good day." And the tears started streaming down his cheeks. And he said, "Your children speak Russian very, very well. It's wonderful to hear American children learn Russian culture." And I was so proud that he was so impressed. And I immediately started praying, "Oh God, whatever he says next, please let them understand it." Because we'd only been up to like lesson 4. We knew how to count to 10, say, "Where is the bathroom?" and "Do you make change in American currency?" That's all we knew how to say in Russian. And so he gestured to some rocking chairs on the front porch of the retirement center, and he said, "Sadis pожалуйста." And all my kids exploded because they had that thrilling moment when you've worked so hard to learn a second language and someone from that culture speaks to you and you know exactly what's being said. And they all whirled around to me and they said, he said, "Sit down." He said, "Sit down, please." I said, "Well, why don't you get off the bus and sit down?" So they jumped off the bus and they sat down. I said, "And say thank you." And they said, "Thank you, thank you." I said, No, say it in Russian. Spasiba, spasiba. And he said, "Da, spasiba." Now, our Russian was so poor, we did not know that in the Russian language, spasiba can mean thank you and you're welcome. It's kind of the same word for both. And so they would say, "Spasiba," and he would say, "Da, spasiba." And they'd say, "Yeah, spasiba." And he'd say, "Da, spasiba." "Yeah, spasiba, da, spasiba." We had this little thank you, you're welcome war going on back and forth while all their Russians were pouring out, and I introduced everybody around. And then I put everybody on the bus with their pen pals. So Christine, she was my prize pupil. She's sitting next to Ghana. And Mark, he was not my prize pupil. He's sitting next to Avram. And we all go off to the Charleston Museum, which is right over there. And when we got to the Charleston Museum, I particularly picked the Charleston Museum because they have a mummy. And I thought all of my students would enjoy seeing that. I had previewed the museum and made a list of Russian vocabulary words and English vocabulary words. And you were supposed to go through the museum with your pen pal and find these things like a scavenger hunt and then do a matching game, the English word for it, the Russian word for it. I could not, in the Russian-English dictionary, find the word mummy. So we used the word dead, which in Russian is kaput. So when you saw the mummy, you had to say dead, kaput, very good, yes. So off they go through the museum, and when they came back, Christine and Mark and Ghana and Avram are this little foursome, like a family, look like grandparents and grandchildren. And Ghana, being a Russian grandmother, is doing what Russian grandmothers do for their grandchildren. She's got Mark around the shoulders. She's poking him in his belly and rubbing his head and pinching his cheeks and just loving on him something awful. And she turns to me and she says, "Mark is good student, yes?" And I said, "Well, actually, no." I told her a little bit about Mark. I said, "Mark laughs and giggles all the time, and he's very friendly, and he has lots of friends, but he doesn't take his work seriously, and he never does his homework." And she turned and looked at her husband, and she said, "Avram, sadis, you sit down." So Avram took his little pen pal and just sank onto a bench and said, "I like ice cream." And then she grabbed Mark by the ears and spun his head around. We did not know that Ghana Mikulinski was a retired schoolmaster. You think you had a hard time in school? How about your teacher is from Russia before the Iron Curtain came down? She grabbed a hold of him, and all the frustration she'd experienced in trying to get her husband to take English language seriously came out on poor little Mark. I mean, she just unloaded on him. She said, "Mark, you must work hard. You must study. You must not play around. It's very bad. Mark, Mr. Lowry is good teacher. He have excellent method. Mr. Lowry is teacher from God." Forever after that, all I had to do was say, "Mark, who am I?" He'd go, I know, you're a teacher from God." She said, "Mark, education is very good. In Russia, no education. education in the very country. In America, everybody happy like Disney world. Happy education. In Russia, no opportunity, no education. Say, how are you? In America, people say, I'm fine, I'm happy. In Russia, no one happy. Everybody say, my head, my back, the KGB. She didn't have enough of the English language to say exactly what she wanted, so just anything was coming out. And Mark's eyes are as big as dinner plates. And finally, she could see she's not getting through to him, and she's desperate to communicate. And so she drug him by the ears across the lobby of the Charleston Museum to a display about slavery in the low country of South Carolina. And she pointed to chains and manacles. Now, her understanding of American culture, and particularly of Black American culture, was very limited still. And she had no idea how significant it was when she pointed to those manacles and she said, Mark, no education, it's like slavery. I saw a little black boy blanch. And he turned around to me and he said, could I have another paper when we go through the museum again? I said, sure. So I gave him a new paper, and Ghana took Mark through the museum. Their heads were together in a cultural exchange like the United Nations would be so jealous of. Gullah meets Russia. And they exchanged all kinds of ideas. Of course, then our field trip was over. We took our Russians back to the retirement center, went back to school, and the next day I said, all right, now, as you could expect, we want to make thank you cards for our Russians and thank them for going on the field trip with us. And Mark sat down and he busily started to write on his thank you card, and I was afraid he was going to rush it because he was all the time hurrying through his work. I said, Mark, take your time. He said, I'll take your time. So he wrote, he folded that up, stuck it in an envelope, ran to the art shelf, got a big cardboard strip, and another big gold circle. I said, Mark, I have told you 1,000 times, no recipe. He said, you're gonna like this, you're gonna like this. I said, I don't believe you, but I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. So I'll see what you're up to. So we go out on the playground at recess, and very quickly I was called over to the swing set to check on something, so I went over there, and when I come back to the other side of the playground, Mark is wearing his wrestling belt, and he's standing in the sandbox, and he points at kids opposite of him, and yells out, Zdravitya! And then a kid would jump in the sandbox and say, hello! And Mark would go, wah! I said, what are you doing? He said, this is my new game, Mr. Lowry. We call it Russian Challenge. He said, I have a new Russian name. I am Ivan the Terrible. I said, okay, so what's this Russian challenge? He said, I jump in the sandbox, I say a word in Russian, and they have to jump in and say it in English. If they get it wrong, I take their wrestling belt. I said, I like it. Continue. So they would stand there all day. Kogdela, how are you? On the following Sunday afternoon, I took the children's thank you notes to my Russians, and I was desperate to see what Mark had written to Ghana and Avram. So when it was their turn to read the letter, Ghana said, the letter say, thank you for helping me. Thank you for going on my field trip. It's very typical little boy's writing. I will not be a slave. And those were the only 3 sentences. So then there was a big space at the bottom of the page. And in huge letters, he had written P.S. And in big black magic marker, you is the bomb. And I said, Ghana, do you understand what that is? And her frustration came out again. She said, yeah, I don't understand. You is the bomb. Why for he say this? And Avram, Mr. I like ice cream, leaned back and he said, I know, Bo, it's American idiom. I was going to tell you a Russian folktale, but I looked at my watch. We don't have time for that. That's okay, I'm talking again later, so I'll save it. Yeah, it'll keep. It's cold in Russia. It'll keep.